Good afternoon. Thank you. Now for something completely different. I was having a conversation this morning with somebody, and I mentioned that last week I spent, last 2 weeks actually, with executive teams at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. I'm from Pennsylvania. And what we do is we use the history of the battle to talk about leadership. And I often get this reaction like, yeah, what does running a battle in 1863 have to do with running a modern organization? Or for that matter, what does military leadership have to do with running modern organizations? If you think about this for a moment, especially if you don't have military experience, in its ultimate test of combat, the military actually functions in a highly decentralized way. And if you think about what decision makers are asked to do, you often have young people confronting situations for the very first time, making high-stakes decisions on tight timelines with imperfect information. So does that sound like anything you've seen in your business experience? Okay, so in fact what I do is I use use history to identify principles of leadership that we can then use to spark conversations about how we want to lead our own organizations. And that's what I propose to do with you here this afternoon, is to share with you some insights into leadership that come out of my research as a military historian, and then invite you to connect the dots to what that looks like in a modern organization today. So I'm going to share with you some stuff that comes out of this book, Combat Jump, about the airborne invasion of Sicily in 1943, and I need to introduce you to two characters in order to do that. The first one, and this is I'll spend a lot of time talking about Colonel Jim Gavin, pictured here in 1944, who was the commander of this American assault, and I'll come back to him. And the second person I want to introduce you to is then Captain, now Colonel retired Edwin Sayer from Breckenridge, Texas, who is pictured here on the right. This picture was taken in the late summer of 1943, and Colonel Sayer has joined us today. He is sitting down in the front row here. Okay. And I also want to thank the sponsors who very generously provided the opportunity for Colonel Sayer to join us today. But we're going to start with Colonel Sayer's then boss, Jim Gavin, who in 1942 is a 35-year-old colonel in the U.S. Army. And the Army says, look, we want you to go down to Fort Benning, Georgia, and we want you to build from the ground up a brand new organization that uses a brand new kind of technology, essentially, to deliver soldiers to the battlefield. These are going to be paratroopers. And then a year from now, just to see how well you've done, we're going to send you into combat against the most successful military organization in the world, which at the time, I would argue, was the German Army. So this is a pretty tall order for this 35-year-old colonel to get. And as with any organization, if you are, if you're thinking about what you're going to, you got to think about your resources that you have to deal with. So he thinks about the resources available to him even as late as 1942. The Army that he grew up in is in no way ready for this challenge. Gavin is commissioned out of West Point in 1929. The military and the Army go hungry with everybody else during the Depression. So as the war breaks out in Europe in 1939 and even as late as 1942, there aren't the resources at hand. There are not enough machine guns. There are not enough blankets. There are not enough jeeps. There are not enough socks. There is not a deep pool of people, experienced people, from which he can draw to build this team. So he's got a pretty significant challenge here. So as he thinks about how he's going to do this, he's got to think about the environment in which he's going to operate. If you're planning a new business venture, well, what's the environment in which we're going to operate? So the overwhelming characteristic of combat is chaos. Everything's going to go wrong. The enemy gets a vote. Unexpected stuff happens all the time. So as he thinks about the organization that he needs to build, it's got to be able to function and succeed in a chaotic environment. So he needs leaders at every level of this organization who are willing to step up and make a decision. He needs individual soldiers who have bought into the mission to the extent that when the whole plan falls apart, somebody's still going to step up to get the job done. So this is the environment in which he's going to have to operate. But as he thinks about his challenges, one of the challenges is that most of the young men that he's going to lead into combat, when the war breaks out in Europe in 1939, these guys are in junior high school. So the only way to get them ready and get them performing at a level that's going to allow them to succeed is to inspire them so that they can do more than they thought they were capable of doing. We're talking about citizen soldiers who have to step up here. Inspirational leadership is what we're talking about. There are essentially three kinds of leadership. Lots of ways to slice this, but a handy way to think about it. There is leadership from authority, do this or else, I'll make your life miserable. And that works for about the first 3 days of basic training, and then that goes away. And then you have, I call exchange leadership. It is, if you do this thing, I'll give you this reward. It's a basic sales organizations. My wife is a psychologist. She calls that press the bar, get a pellet leadership. And then you have inspirational leadership. Inspirational leadership, Dwight Eisenhower said, was when other people are doing what you want them to do because they want to do it. They are personally and emotionally invested in the mission. Each individual is. That's a pretty high bar. That's what Gavin is going to have to shoot for this team. He's got to figure out an organization that can recover very quickly from shock and function amid chaos. An organization that is flexible, that can spot opportunities early, bring the right resources to bear, and still be ready to turn on a dime when the situation calls for it. But he has the whole drive from West Point, New York to Fort Benning to think about this and come up with the answer. So, I mean, how hard could it be, right? So, the ultimate challenge is not building a cool-looking organization. The ultimate challenge is building that organization and then having it succeed, in this case, in combat. So because we have the benefit of hindsight, what I'm going to do is jump ahead in the story from the summer of 42 to the summer of 43. I'm going to give you a little snapshot of just how chaotic this environment is. Then we'll go back and we'll figure out how Gavin prepared to succeed in that environment, okay? So it is now July 9th, 1943. Jim Gavin's a 36-year-old full colonel now. He is struggling to keep his footing as his aircraft is getting knocked around by 35-knot crosswinds on a 3-hour flight from Tunisia in northern Africa to the island of Sicily. They are about to spearhead the Allied invasion of Sicily. Jim Gavin has been a professional soldier his entire adult life. He enlisted in the Army at 17 years old, but he's never been in combat before. Nor have any of the other 3,400 men in 225 aircraft up in the air that night. None of them has ever been in combat before either. So he's got some pretty predictable concerns, right? Who's going to perform well? Who's going to perform poorly? Did we prepare for every contingency? Did we bring the right equipment? Have I accurately estimated what the enemy is going to do? And then he's got this additional burden because Gavin is about to attempt what no American commander has ever done before in history, and that is to lead a large body of men into battle by parachute assault. Never been tried by the Americans before. And here's why they decided to use paratroopers. This is the southwest coast of Sicily. Two of the American invasion beaches are near Gela and Scalidi. What has happened is the Germans and Italians defending the island, principally we're worried about the Germans because they're better equipped and better trained, they have pulled back 12 or 15 miles from the coastline to get out of range of the guns of the U.S. Navy out there. And what they're going to do is they're going to wait to see where the Allies commit. And when they figure that that's the invasion beach, they're going to counterattack on the morning of D-Day. The invasion is most vulnerable at the water's edge. If you've ever seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, you can envision what that is. That's where the invasion is most likely to fail. The paratroopers then are going to jump into that space between the invasion beaches and the enemy and seize the bridges and causeways and road intersections to block those counterattacks coming out of the hills on the morning of D-Day. If they fail, the invasion is in jeopardy. And if they fail, they're all now on an enemy-held island if the invasion doesn't work, because it's just, you get the parachute, you get a one-way ticket with that thing. There's no going